to the break with me, your man, Louie T. Welcome to the command post. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. Of course, I'm your commander-in-chief, Louie T. Thank you for joining me. So I was feeling a little listy, and you know what that means. I started listing stuff, and all of my lists are comprised of 7 items, and this is no different. And this is a list you've never seen before anywhere else. This is a LouieTeeNetwork original. So I was thinking about how can I put out a different list that isn't something that's been recycled, repackaged from some other site or some other, concept someone's thought about. And I just thought about the roster, and we've talked about everything that you can talk about regarding this roster. Breakout players, guys that are going to take the next step, and anything you can think of, right? We've exhausted just about all of those topics. It's that time of the year. So I got to thinking about what a healthy program, because I'm being honest with you, in full transparency. This is the first time as a fan of this team since I was a teeny tiny tot. And at that point, I didn't know what the hell was going on, to be honest with you. This is the first time that I've been a fan of a healthy NFL operation. From top to bottom, this thing is well put together. Everyone's on one accord. Everyone is moving in the same direction. And there is a clear vision for what is to transpire, and everybody sees the vision. It is so refreshing. And at times, I still have to remind myself that this is not only real and it is now your existence as a fan, but you need to embrace it and not be afraid to talk your shit. I continue to remind myself of that so that I stay present and in the moment. But also, part of being a part of a winning organization and a real full adult ran operation is that you're not only preparing for the present, you're also prepping yourself simultaneously for the future. That's what the best run organizations do. And in doing that, you're starting to stockpile pieces for the future. Now, you can't know if these pieces are going to work out or not, but it doesn't stop you from identifying guys that look the part of guys that are already either here or you've seen, work out elsewhere that you want to replicate. In the case of Adam Peters, San Francisco, I've told you he's sort of building this team in the image of that team over there. And there's certain guys that he's brought in here. And when he talks about them, he even uses and references names from his San Francisco 49ers past, i.e. Ben Sinnott gives him, I called him Kyle Juszczyk. He said he's a cross between Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle. Okay, whatever the case may be, I think he sees Noah Brown as this team's, oh my God, what's the big receiver for the 49ers? Oh my gosh. I can see he had, one time he had red hair, then he had green hair. I can't remember his name, but he went to Tennessee. And he's a bigger wide receiver. And that's what Noah Brown represents for us, is that guy that the 49ers had. And so you can see the things that they're trying to replicate here. They want to find their Trent Williams. They went out and got a Trent Williams in Laramie Tunsil. No, he's not Trent Williams, but he's just a step below, right? And so you want to solidify that position. They went and got themselves a right tackle. They want to put a fortress in front of their, star quarterback. And when you look at the pieces that are here, everybody's, essentially on 1-year deals. Nobody's on, a super long-term contract. Everything kind of feels year to year right now. And I feel like there are a number of guys next year that are here this year, much like last year, that won't be here next year. And some of them are veterans that have played really well for us. But at some point, you got to make space for the young guys. And so I've got a list of 7 guys who need more seasoning. This is the let them cook crock pot edition. And what that means is these are guys that are going to slow cook. All right. They're not ready to help this team prepare a full 4-course meal that is warranting a 4-star rating, right? A 5-star rating, if you will. These are guys that need more seasoning, put them in the crock pot, put it on slow, right? And just walk away, right? Put it on slow and low and just walk away. And you hope by the time you open up the pot, it starts to fumigate the entire kitchen. You have, this smells great. You open the pot and it looks like it's ready, right? 7 guys that are being brought in, and we don't know what they're going to look like this preseason. Obviously the camp portion, the preseason, all going to tell these guys what they have from an athletic profile, from a guy's work ethic, to can this guy be what we envision him being 1-2 years down the road, right? So with that said, I'm going to give you 7 guys that I think they brought in here with a vision for that player to take over a spot that is currently being held by a veteran that is not going to be here much longer. And so they're just kind of buying their time. And while those guys, those veterans are here trying to help us in the pursuit of a championship, these young guys are going to watch these veterans, learn from them, and eventually move into their spots when they're ready. Starting with number 7. Now, this guy isn't like the rest. If this were a multiple choice question and I asked you who doesn't belong, it'd be him. The first guy on this list, number 7, is Tyreek Phillips. If you recall, the Commanders had a tryout. Now, this tryout was supposed to be for, it was a rookie tryout, essentially a rookie camp, if you will. Tryout. It was rookie camp. But they also had a tryout there for a few rookies, and a few veterans were there. And then you had a couple of the second-year players that participated in that camp as well. So Tyreek Phillips was one of the veterans, if you recall, that was in attendance, that wasn't on the roster. And they ended up signing Tyreek Phillips. Of all the guys that were there, Tyreek Phillips was one of the few guys that got a deal to come to camp. I think they see a potential in him to be this, because Tyreek Phillips is still young. People forget this is a former 3rd-round pick of the Ravens in like the 2020 draft, probably 2021, no later than that. So you're talking about a guy that's still probably 26, 27 max years old, still relatively young, a lot of football left in front of this kid. And if he's properly developed and put into a role that he can excel, and that's the thing, is you just got to find where a guy fits and allow him to star in his role. Trent Scott has carved out a niche. They found a role for Trent Scott and where he belongs and where he fits. And that is as a Swiss Army knife up and down the line. He can play left tackle. He can play left guard. He can play right guard. He can play right tackle. But what he has excelled at here is when they go to that jumbo package and they need an extra offensive lineman to block and do those things, they've been able to get Trent Scott in there, and he's really, carved out a niche for himself. He even caught a touchdown pass last year. I'm not sure if Tyreek Phillips, at his size, is capable of doing that, and I don't think his movement skills suggest that he would be able to do something like that. But I do think they see him as a guy who has tackle experience and at guard, and probably is better suited to play inside at guard, which is the same could probably be said for Trent Scott. They may see Tyreek Phillips as a younger version of Trent Scott. Remember Trent Scott on the last year of his deal here in Washington. He could be gone next year. Tyreek Phillips could be filling in for him next year, right? Easily transition into that role. Don't expect any of the guys that we're going to talk about on this list to make the team. All right. That's why this list is the let them cook crock pot edition, because they ain't cooking anything this year. They slow cooking in the crock pot. These guys aren't making the team this year unless some unforeseen circumstances transpire and all of a sudden their services are warranted. There's just no way Tyreek Phillips is making this football team as of right now. So, but I could see him taking over for Trent Scott a year from now. Maybe he does. Maybe he's not even here in September. Tyreek Phillips, I'm talking about. Maybe when they cut this roster down from 90 to 53, they axe him and he's not even back on the practice squad. My guess is he's going to be one of those. My guess is he's going to be one of those guys on the practice squad. And if he's not on the practice squad, he's one of the guys that's on speed dial. But I think they're going to keep him around. That's just a guess. And it really feels like there are a number of guys that are teetering, right? We'll get to that a little bit later on because I got another guy that we're going to talk about here that I think they're letting him cook for a little while. They brought him in here. They're going to coach him up and see what he can do. And if they're pleased with what they see, he's going to end up taking over somebody's spot on this roster down the road. But Tyreek Phillips has an opportunity. He's got to make the most of it this summer. If he does, I think he's a guy that could easily be here on this roster next year in that Trent Scott role. Let's see if he continues to cook in the crock pot or not. Going to number 6 on this list, now we're talking about the youngins, the young guys, the first year, the second year players that are continuing to grow in the program. This is what good teams do. You might not see an undrafted guy. You might not see a late round guy be a contributor in year 1 or even year 2 for that matter. But by year 3, if that guy has taken to the program, has done everything the right way, and an opportunity finally presents itself, he better be ready to take advantage. And I think that's what you're going to start to see with this program as Adam Peters gets more and more drafts and off seasons under his belt. You're going to see more and more of these guys start to take a step forward as contributors on this roster. And this next guy is someone that I've got my eye on this off season or this training camp session into the preseason, and that's Alle Caho, a guy that they went out and signed as an undrafted linebacker out of UCLA, Adam Peters' alma mater, and he never, misses an opportunity to let you know that these guys are fellow Bruins. And this was a guy that was highly recruited out of high school, went to Alabama initially, had some injuries, obviously set him back in his career, went to UCLA and was able to fight his way back after missing 2 full seasons roughly of football due to injuries. This guy's athletic enough, and I think he has the profile of a special teams feat. And I think they're going to try and groom him to be the Nick Bellore replacement. I don't think Alle Caho has any defensive linebacker value whatsoever. Just like Nick Bellore, you'll never see him on the field in a defensive capacity unless they're down by the goal line, right? You need an extra linebacker body. But you're not going to see Nick Bellore on the field in a defensive capacity unless we get into a blowout situation, and there were those last year, and now he's getting some run because they've taken all of the starters out of the game. But you're not going to see Alle Caho, I don't believe, in a defensive manner on the football field. I think he's here specifically for special teams prowess only. And that's okay. You need those type of guys on your roster. And I think Alle Caho is one of those guys. So when you see Alle Caho this preseason, he's a guy that I think has a legitimate shot to really be a player that they let cook for 2 years. Remember, Nick Bellore signed a 2-year deal. So Nick's going to be here this year. Nick's going to be here next year. And then I think he's going to retire. He said he wanted to play for 2 more years, and then he was going to hang it up. He just wanted his kid to remember that he played football. And he wanted his kid to be old enough to remember, running around on the field. Daddy played football. And so Alle Caho probably needs at least 1 more year, right, this year, to really get his football legs back under him. He played last year, but he barely played last year. That last year was more of a milestone, like the mental hurdle of I'm actually healthy. I can do the things that I used to do. This year is more about, all right, now let's get back to playing football. Next year, Now you've really gotten the speed of the NFL game. You've been here for a year. You know how to work out. You've put on some weight. You understand what your role is going to be, and he attacks it next year and he puts himself in a position to be someone that potentially makes this roster and starts to look to take over for Nick Bellore. So I look at Ale Caho as a guy that 2 years from now I could easily see as the new special teams ace linebacker on this roster. We'll see what he looks like this season, preseason, I should say. Number 5, another undrafted guy that I think they have a clear picture of what they view him as, and that's Jacobe Jones, the wide receiver that they took or that they signed as an undrafted free agent out of UCF. This is a guy with just like a ridiculous frame at 6'3", damn near 230. I think he's 227. Like he's a big dude, and at the receiver position, and he can run. And I think they see him as a potential Noah Brown replacement. He's got a similar frame to Noah Brown. He's a little bit, heavier than Noah Brown, but similar size, height-wise, frame-wise. He's a guy that will block down the field, do the dirty work. The question is, can he play special teams? And if he could check that box, there's a chance that Jacobe Jones could easily end up on this roster as early as next season. Again, Noah Brown, 1-year deal, right? They'll be looking to find replacements for some of these guys that are here this year. Debo may not be here next year. Noah Brown may not be here next year, right? Michael Gallup may not be here next year. KJ Osborne may not be here this year. Michael Gallup may not be here this year, but if any of those guys are here this year, they may not be here next year, right? So you just got to assume that some of these young guys that aren't on the roster this year, but they're on the practice squad, they're grooming these guys to potentially be here next year, right? And Jacobe Jones has the frame of a guy that could easily earn a roster spot here. Again, we don't have a lot of receivers with height and size, right? We don't have guys that are 220 pounds on this roster. We don't have guys that are 6'2", 6'3". There are not a bunch of those guys running around. People keep bringing up Luke McCaffrey. Luke McCaffrey is barely, he's not 6'2", right? He's 6'1" and some change, but we just rounded up to 6'2" because it's very close, right? And Luke McCaffrey is sub 200 pounds. He may be 200 pounds now, right? He got drafted. He was 198 pounds. So even though he's got a little bit of height on him, he's not boxing anybody out, right? That's not his game. He's not 215. So we don't have a lot of receivers that give you that kind of physicality. Jacobe Jones brings that to the table. He's a guy that, Jawan Jennings was the receiver that I couldn't think of earlier in San Francisco that Noah Brown kind of mimics here for the Commanders. Jacobe Jones is a Jawan Jennings type of player. And I think that's what Adam Peters saw in him. And if he can continue to develop, there is a roster spot with Jacobe Jones's name on it just based off of his measurables. So if he can play special teams, if he can show that he can consistently catch the football in traffic, be physical, run after catch, he can, strong hands, if he can show these things, there's a roster spot with Jacobe Jones's name on it, potentially as early as next season. 2 years down the road for sure. But again, he's got to showcase the skills necessary to put himself in a position where they feel comfortable moving on from a guy like Noah Brown. You've got to make them feel comfortable like we have the replacement here in-house and we can move on, right? Number 4 is a guy that I think looks the part of the prototypical box safety in this defense. He looks the part of a Jeremy Chin. The question is, can he play the part of a Jeremy Chin at a much higher level as a pass defender? That's where Chin struggled last season. Part of the reason why I think he's not here is they want better coverage down the field. Don't know if this guy necessarily checks that box off, but at 6'2" and almost 215 pounds, he looks the part. I'm talking about Robert McDaniel, the safety out of Jackson State. And we've talked about his versatility. Played a little bit of outside corner, played a little bit over the slot, played down by the box, played around the line of scrimmage as a run defender, played underneath coverage. This is a guy that did a little bit of everything. All right. So he's got versatility. The question now is, how good are you down around the line of scrimmage and how good are you away from the line of scrimmage? They're going to find out what Robert McDaniel can and can't do. And if he proves to be a guy that is versatile as a special teams player and also can help you on defense, he could leapfrog some guys that you guys love, like a Tyler Owens, for instance. They want to find out about Tyler Owens this year. We found out about Tyler Owens, the special teams player, last year. They want to find out Tyler Owens, the defensive player, what he's all about. They're going to test him this preseason, and they want to find out, can this guy blitz? Can he play in space? Can we put this guy in coverage and trust him? What can we do with Tyler Owens other than tell him to run down the field really, really fast and make a tackle on special teams? And another guy that they're going to try to look to and find out what he can do is Robert McDaniel. There's a space. Remember, they kept 6 safeties last year. Right now, the roster is shaping up where there's only 5 spots right now. Someone has to stand up and say, I deserve a roster spot. Otherwise, they're just going to keep 5 safeties. I think that's going to be the number anyway, because you've got other positions that probably need to keep an extra guy. And I think the first place you turn to is safety. But with that said, Robert McDaniel probably not going to make the roster this year. But I look at him, I see the traits, I see the measurables, I see his background, and I understand why they brought him in here, why they feel good about him, and why he could be an ideal fit in this defense a year or 2 from now. Right? Again, Will Harris signed a 2-year deal, but Will Harris isn't stopping anybody from entering the starting lineup, right? Will Harris is going to start this year. Will Harris does not have to start next year. If they draft a first-round safety next year, Will Harris isn't starting. If they draft a second-round safety next year, Will Harris isn't starting, more likely than not, right? There's nothing stopping, but Robert McDaniel, more likely than not, isn't taking Will Harris's spot. He feels like more of a third safety that they want to put down around the box, right? When they want to go to a bigger, package, but don't want to put a linebacker on the field, but want to put a, big safety on the field, but you're still in a 3 safety look. That's what he feels like to me. He doesn't feel like, oh, Robert McDaniel's their other starting safety. We'll see, right? Jeremy Chin was last year. And his frame is very similar to that of Jeremy Chin. His athletic exploits are very similar to that of a Jeremy Chin. His versatility is very similar to that of a Jeremy Chin. So can he show those things? Can he showcase those things in the preseason and in training camp? That's the real question. All he's got to do is show flashes this year, enough so that they say, hey, we want you on the practice squad. If he can do that, he's got a chance to stick next year on the 53-man roster, does Robert McDaniel. So we'll see. Because remember, this is the last year of Percy Butler, right? We'll see what happens with Tyler Owens. Revo is going to be here, right? But Revo isn't a defender. They claim they want to get Revo on the field as a defender. That's what they say. They said the same thing last year about Defoe. And every week, Defoe pretty much non-existent. So as long as Revo is here and on a special team, as in a special teams capacity as one of the best in the league, he'll have a roster spot here, and it'll be primarily on special teams. Maybe they do carve out a niche for Revo on defense. I'll believe it when I see it. I think Robert McDaniel, a year from now, has a better shot at being a defender on the field that contributes than Jeremy Reeves does. But we'll see, right? So Robert McDaniel checks in at number 4. Number 3 is a guy that they spent the most money on. And while this may not mean anything, it could mean everything. Guy they spent the most money on of their undrafted free agent acquisitions this offseason, and that's Timothy McKay, the offensive lineman. Let's call him what he is, the guard, a guard out of NC State. 6'4", 312 pounds. I'm looking at this guy, and again, he had an injury. That's why he didn't get drafted. And I don't know if he's going to even be ready for the start of training camp or not. I don't know if he participated in any of the, off-season camps, but they are clearly interested in him, and they know whatever his timeline is. They were comfortable with it when they signed him and paid him the money because he injured himself right before the draft, during the draft process, right? This was a guy that most people thought was going to be a mid-round pick. Then he tears his pec, prior to the draft, and boom, goes from a mid-round pick to undrafted. And that's why Washington had to shell out the money that they did, because this was a guy that was going to be drafted in the 2025 NFL draft. So the question is, how long is that recovery process? What does he look like? How do they feel about him? Because Chris Paul feels like a guy that's on the verge of no longer being here. Forget about making the roster. Chris Paul is not making the roster with all the depth that we have now. I don't even know if he made the roster last year, but I know he was around on the practice squad last year. It feels like Chris Paul could easily not even be on the practice squad this year with all the depth that they're starting to acquire and accumulate on the offensive line. Part of that depth is a guy like Timothy McKay. Also, you got to look at other guys like Nate Herbig and Andrew Wley, who won't be here next year potentially. Herbig here on a one-year deal. He could easily be back. He could not be back, right? We said the same thing about the backup center last year, and they ended up bringing him back, Michael Dieter. So, we say Nate Herbig may not be here, but he could be here, just like Michael Dieter is back. Same thing with Andrew Wley. Feels like Wley won't be back next year, and we really, truly don't have an answer. That's what we really need. And maybe Foster Sarell ends up being that swing tackle in the making, and maybe he could easily be on this list. He was a guy that I definitely considered. He was right on the outside looking in, but I don't know if he, I want to see Foster Sarell and see if if he's capable, because he's very young of being a swing tackle. He could be the future swing tackle here in Washington for all we know. But I do know this, Wley probably won't be here next year. Herbig may not be here next year. Chris Paul may not be here next year. And he may not even be here this year. And at some point you look around and you say, hey, well, who's the young guy that's going to slide in here and start to, fill that void? Timothy McKay makes a lot of sense to me. And if they like what they see, and if O-line Bobby Johnson says, yeah, I can work with this kid, next year, as early as next season, Timothy McKay could easily end up blowing up. Did you see what I did there? That offensive line depth at the guard position and inserting himself right in the mix. He won't start, obviously, this offensive line. If Sam Cosmi comes back healthy and everything else plays out the way that it should, the offensive line is ironclad locked for the next 2 to 3 years, right? Tyler Biadasz would have his contract run out first because he's got 2 more years left. But everybody else, because we expect Laramie Tunsil to get an extension. Coleman's still on a rookie contract in year 2 of that. So he's still got 3 more years left, 2 more after this season. Cosmi just signed an extension last year, a 4-year extension. So he's got at a bare minimum 3 more years. And then we just drafted Josh Connolly, and he's in the first of a 4-year contract with a 5th-year option that if he's playing well, they're going to pick up. So this line is locked and loaded for at least the next 2 years. And then assuming that Tyler Biadasz is back, but if you don't think he's back, you draft his replacement. Either way, you just want depth behind those guys. You got Allegretti for another 2 years, this year and next. McKay could be one of those guys that could also be the face of the interior offensive line as a depth piece moving forward. So that's a guy that I see with a potential bright future if he takes the coaching, because there were a lot of deficiencies that I saw with his game. If he takes the coaching and continues to develop Timothy McKay, a guy that they paid a lot of money to get him here to outbid other teams, could easily end up being in the mix as early as next season. Just needs a little bit more seasoning, put him in the crock pot. We may be able to take him out of that crock pot next year, and he may be more beef up front for this offensive line. Going to number 2, it's Sam Hartman, quarterback, right? At some point, and it could be as early as next year. At some point, you want to feel confident enough in Sam Hartman that you don't have to keep a guy the ilk of a Marcus Mariota that's making that kind of money. And again, you don't have to cross that bridge right now because Jaden Daniels is still on his rookie deal. But the minute you pay Jaden Daniels that exorbitant amount of money that's coming, right? When he has that re-up and signs that massive deal where he's making $80 million a year, right? When that day comes, you don't want to be paying a backup quarterback anything at that point. So essentially, Sam Hartman has about 2 more years, this year and next year, to prove to this organization that he's good enough to be the primary backup of Jaden Daniels. Otherwise, they're going to keep cycling in veterans. They're going to draft another quarterback here in the near future and try to groom him to be Jaden Daniels' primary replacement. But if Sam Hartman can show that he has the tools to get the job done, like Marcus Mariota did last season when Jaden wasn't available, Marcus had to step in and he was able to seamlessly transition into making this offense, efficient and at times lifting it up, like that Cowboys game in the season finale, the regular season finale. So the question becomes, can Sam Hartman establish himself as a backup quarterback that they trust to the point where they don't need to spend any money at that position? Because eventually, that's what it's going to boil down to, is can we trust you enough? Because just think about it from this standpoint. Sam Hartman, they didn't view him as a guy that was initially, right? And, eventually you get to a point where I think Sam might have been the emergency quarterback last year. But initially when the 53-man roster came out, they didn't cut Jeff Driscoll. They cut Sam Hartman and they brought him back on the practice squad. Now, as the season goes along and you start, making moves and cycling guys in and out, they might have had to move on from Jeff Driscoll and at some point activated Sam Hartman, put him on the active roster, and made him the emergency quarterback. But keep in mind that in one game last year, we were one play away from our emergency quarterback, whether that was Sam Hartman or Jeff Driscoll at the time. We were one play away from our emergency quarterback being in the game last year. I remember this very vividly when we were playing Carolina and Jaden Daniels left that game and Marcus Mariota was running around very early in that game. And he had a play where he dove for a first down and he got hit. And I remember Charles Davis saying, Marcus Mariota needs to slow down a little bit. He's got to remember, there's nobody else behind you. You're it at quarterback. He's got to be mindful of that. And it's not like Mariota has the cleanest bill of health either. So they've got to trust Sam Hartman enough to say, hey, if something goes down, you're up. He's got to show this preseason that he's comfortable because last year, Jeff Driscoll got a lot of the reps and Hartman got whatever he didn't take. The roles will be reversed this year. They know what Josh Johnson is as a veteran. They know what Marcus Mariota is, and you're not going to see a lot of Jaden Daniels this year. This is the Sam Hartman show this preseason, and he's got to show that in year 2 of this offense that he is mastering and really comfortable in what they're asking him to do to the point where they're willing to move on from these veterans and say, all right, Sam, we trust that if you got to go in the game, you can take care of business. That's not this year, obviously, with Marcus Mariota being back on another 1-year deal, with Josh Johnson being here potentially. That's not this year, but it's as early as next year, potentially. Definitely 2 years from now when Jaden's up for that extension. And then number 1 on this list, a guy that I think could be contributing as early as next year. I wouldn't be shocked if somehow he found himself on the roster this year contributing, but this feels like a next year thing. Wley, running back out of Arizona, that was an undrafted free agent acquisition last year in 2024, was really one of the stars of the preseason for this team, especially early on, early and late. Was really good against the Jets in week 1 of the preseason last year. Was really good in the finale against the Patriots. Was kind of absent in the second preseason game against the Dolphins for whatever reason. I think they were trying to hide him, but then they didn't hide him in the preseason finale. So this is a guy that we talked to you about, Anthony Lynn, the running backs coach, raving about him being the best of the group this offseason in terms of the young guys. He is clearly comfortable in the system. He's got some juice. He can catch it out of the backfield. He feels like the primary Austin Ekeler replacement right now. It feels like he can return kickoffs in the Austin Ekeler role. He feels like he can catch the football out of the backfield in the Austin Ekeler role. He feels like he can be a running back you can hand it to in the Austin Ekeler role. He feels like he can be a pass protector if he can nail that portion of his duties down. This is a guy that he feels like the natural progression away from Austin Ekeler after this season. This is X last year in Washington. Unless Ekeler goes bananas, and he was so good last year, and that was with the 2 concussions, was Ekeler. He was so good for us last year. But clearly, he's older, and the concussions are an issue. This feels like it for Ekeler in Washington, right? For better or for worse, this feels like it. And it feels like Michael Wley is literally waiting. It feels like he's in the apprenticeship program, and he's just buying his time as an understudy to take over for Ekeler in every way, shape, and form on this team. He feels like a guy that can be a key contributor on this roster as soon as next year. There will be no B-Rob here next year. There will be no Austin Ekeler, more likely than not, next year. And there will be an ushering in of new young running backs. And we said it could be an all Wildcat backfield with Bill and Michael Wley in the backfield. 2 guys that were finished up their collegiate careers at the University of Arizona. So it just feels like Michael Wley is a guy, and I think he's going to kill it again in the preseason this year. With whatever opportunity he gets. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if they hit him again, just to make sure nobody tries to poach him off of our practice squad. They may try to protect him during the season just to make sure that it doesn't happen. Because he's a guy that I think they've got plans for. And to me, he's that guy that's definitely in that crock pot. They got him on slow, but trust and believe he'll be one of the first ones they pull out of that crock pot and say, yeah, he's ready. Go ahead and put him on the plate. Those are the 7 guys that I view as guys that need to, cook just a little bit longer, need just a little bit more seasoning. We need to figure out what some of these guys are. Alle Caho, Timothy McKay, Robert McDaniel, some of these new guys, we got to figure out if they can. But some of these veterans or some of these other guys, Tyreek Phillips, like, it's make or break for him, right? He's been on a bunch of different teams. He's been in the league a little bit now. Can you or can't you? I look at a guy like Sam Hartman. Can you or can't you? Right? We know how good you are in the locker room. They love you in the quarterback's room. You're like Jaden's one of his better friends on the team. You've established a great relationship and rapport. I feel like he's one of those glue guys that you want around in the locker room. But at some point, you got to make sure that you earn your keep. We'll see if he can do that. And then Michael Wley, he feels like a guy. It feels almost inevitable at this point that Michael Wley, a name that kind of, faded to black a little bit, was no longer in our consciousness. I'm starting to bang that Michael Wley drum again. It's that time, right? We did it last preseason. I'm doing it again this year. Won't make the team. Not expecting that. Not with Bill being here. But and you still having Jeremy McNichols and still having the 2 veterans and Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Ekeler. There's no space for him on the roster this year. But next year, there'll be a ton of space. And there'll be a clear role for him on this roster. He's my number one on this list of guys who are in the crock pot. We letting them cook in the crock pot. And next year or 2 years down the road for some of these guys, your time is now. So, what do you think? Did I leave somebody off the list? Is there somebody else that you look at on this roster and say, no, he's going to be on this roster next year or 2 years from now? This is the spot he's going to take. Leave it down in the comment section. Would love to read some of your responses. And some of these guys, we got to see them. Like Alle Caho could be a big nothing burger. Right? He could be an absolute nothing burger. Timothy McKay, same thing. Robert McDaniel, same thing. We don't know about these guys. They got to show and prove. I just can see the vision for these guys. But if you see some different guys, leave it down in the comment section. Can't wait to read your responses. I'm going to give you the list real quick once more. Tyreek Phillips, number 7. Number 6, Alle Caho. Number 5, Jacobe Jones, wide receiver. Number 4 is Robert McDaniel, safety, out of Jackson State. Number 3, Timothy McKay, offensive guard, out of NC State. Number 2 is Sam Hartman, quarterback, second year. Going to find out what he can do this preseason. I think he's going to get a ton of reps. A ton of reps. If my guess is he'll play the entire third preseason game by himself. That's my guess. He'll play a huge chunk of the first game. I think you'll see Jaden potentially in the second game of the preseason because I don't think they're going to have a scrimmage that week with Cincinnati. It's a Monday night game. The schedule's a little funky, so those teams won't scrimmage. So I think you'll see Jaden in that second preseason game. You won't see Jaden or Marcus Mariota, for that matter, in the third preseason game. And I think it'll be the Sam Hartman show in that finale versus the Ravens. So let's see what he does. And then number 1 is Michael Wley, running back, second year, out of Arizona, a guy that I think they like a lot. And I think they have that Austin Eckler role pegged for him next year when Eckler is no longer on this roster. Wouldn't be shocked if they called him up for duty in action this year if Eckler were to go down. But with all the backs that they still have, I still think he's a year away from truly seeing the field in a real capacity. I'm almost willing to go out on a limb and guarantee that Michael Wley will be on this roster next year. But we got to get to the point where no one plucks him off of our practice squad. You know, he shows out this preseason, stays healthy, all of that stuff. So we got a ways to go. But if I were a betting man, I would tell you right now, Michael Wley, of all of these second-year undrafted guys that are here, that weren't on the roster last year, and even the guys that are here this year as undrafteds, because I don't think any of the undrafteds this year are making the team. Like last year, we had 2 guys surprise us. This roster isn't last year's roster. I don't think any of the young undrafteds are making it this year. Wley feels like he's leading the pack of the 2 classes of undrafteds that haven't had a taste of the roster just yet. Obviously, you had 2 guys last year make the roster, and until they're not on the roster, you expect them to be on the roster again in Colson Yankoff and Tyler Owens. I don't see any of the guys that they got this year making the team. Feels like Michael Wley is leading the pack of all the guys that were here last year that are trying to fight for a roster spot and the guys that they got this year that are undrafted, trying to fight for a roster spot. So, again, leave it down in the comment section. Can't wait to read your responses. That's going to do it for me, your man, Louie T. You know what it is. Post up. Take command. Till next time, you guys enjoy the rest of your 4th of July weekend, and I will be back chopping it up with you next week. Peace. LouieTeeNetwork.